I've entitled this message, Ritual versus Reality. Some of you, if you can picture in your mind's eye a statue that has water pouring out of its mouth. They actually have some of these in Europe. Now that statue never tastes of the life-giving water that's spewing out of its mouth. What Paul the Apostle is going to do now, as we continue in the book of Romans, 2nd chapter, is he is addressing individuals who are religious leaders who have been actually teaching the Word of God, the life-giving Word, and yet never tasted it themselves. And as a result of that, the lives they lived were very inconsistent to what they were saying. They had religion, and they had rituals in their life, and yet there was no real reality. Hypocrisy has been defined like this. It's a pen. It's pointed in one direction, and yet it's headed in another. I think that's a good description. Hypocrisy is like a pen, pointed in one direction, yet it is headed in another. And Paul deals with these particular hypocrites very forcibly. So take your Bibles now and turn to Romans chapter 2, verse 17. We will finish this chapter today. If you stay with us, we'll go through every single word of the book of Romans. You'll get Paul's grand display of what the gospel is. Romans chapter 2. Starting out with verse 17, he says, "Indeed, you are called a Jew, and rest on the law, and make your boast in God, and know His will, and approve the things that are excellent, being instructed out of the law, and are confident that you yourselves are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, having the form of knowledge and truth in the law. You therefore who teach another, do you not teach yourselves? You who preach that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who make your boast in the law, do you dishonor God through breaking the law?" And then he quotes Isaiah 52, "For the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles." Remember now, Gentiles is anyone who is not a Jew, because of you, as it is written. Verse 25. Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to, let me unpack a little bit of what Paul has said. Remember now, the whole book of Romans can be summarized in this verse. Take your Bibles, turn to Romans 1, verse 16. This is the summary of the entire book of Romans. All 16 chapters can be summarized in this one verse. "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." And he quotes Habakkuk 2:4. Paul, the third most influential life ever to be lived, said, "I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ." What is this gospel? This gospel, very simply, in 1 Peter 2, verse 18, hear these words now. "For he suffered once for sins, just for the Christ, for the unjust, that he might bring us to God." That's the gospel. Christ suffered in our behalf. He who was without sin suffered in our behalf so that we might be forgiven. For you see, God is no respecter of persons. He's impartial. Each of us have violated God's law in one way or another. The standard is perfection because God himself is perfect. We can't be good 75% of the time and bad 25% of the time. We have the same standard at work. They want me fixing, I'm a locksmith, and they want me fixing these locks 100% of the time, not 25% of the time, 75% of the time. God is infinitely holy. So we may have acts of kindness and goodness 75% of the time, but we may say, think, or do things that are not right. The Bible says that if you blaspheme God's name, He will not hold you guiltless. The Bible says if you hate somebody in your heart, Matthew chapter 5, you've actually killed them. So the standard is perfection. Nobody, including me, no one, can keep God's standard perfectly all the time. Because of that, we're in need. That's why Christ is referred to as a Savior. A man's drowning in a lake. It's doing him no good for you to stand, or anybody to stand on the seaside, and they're safe to the shore, and to shout swimming instructions. What good is that? He's grasping at anything. He is drowning. He's on his third time going down. He needs a Savior. The Bible portrays Christ as our Savior from the sin that can destroy the very things that we love most. Now, when we say sin, what do we mean? Simply this. There are some things that are very self-centered that we say, some things that are very self-centered that we do. There's some things that we think that are very self-centered. The Bible technically defines sin as the absence of law, 1 John 5. What is the absence of law? Driving 65 miles an hour through a school zone, you're without law. That's what sin is. It's breaking law. Because of that, the Bible teaches us that Christ died on our behalf, and the good news is that sin no longer has to have dominion over us. We now have salvation, forgiveness of that sin, and we now have power to live for God. That's called sanctification. That's what Paul means by the gospel. Christ was dead, crucified, He was buried, and much to the shock of His disciples, 3 days later rose from the dead. And that has changed the course of history. Much evidence regarding the resurrection. I just might add that people don't run around saying Christ is risen from the dead when they know that message is going to cause them to be put to death. They just don't do that. And boy, they did. And many of them lost their lives for the belief that Christ had risen from the dead. Why? Because they saw Him. So what Romans is saying here, and what Paul is saying specifically, is that we have good news. The good news does not make sense unless there's some bad news. Bad news is this: man is in great need. Man is in great need. There's no such thing as good unless you have a contrast to it. The bad is this: I've got an issue with God. And Paul deals with that in Romans chapter 1. And he says in Romans chapter 1 that there is no man or woman on earth who does not know there is a God. Why does he say that? Because he says God reveals Himself in creation. This is Romans chapter 1. We've been over this. He says that we know because what may be known of God is manifest in them, their conscience, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood. Who can't look at the stars and the majesties of the heavens and just in awe and wonder realize the power and the beauty and the order? Remember now, there's no such thing as design without a designer. There's no such thing as order without one who organizes. All design calls for a designer. I'll tell you what has not been observed by science. Science has never observed chaos, chance, non-intelligence ever produce a design. Non-intelligence produces a chair. There's order and there's design and power. You have that principle. That's what we observe. What we do not observe is this coming together by chance. That's a basic thesis of evolution. Paul tells us in Romans chapter 1 that people know there is a God. Number 2, you see creation, there's a God. You can see the flight of a bird. You can see how geese can form a V and cut down the wind resistance. They have no idea what they're doing. They do it by instinct. God puts it in their mind, and it cuts down the wind resistance. Design, I always tell you, as a designer, God is known throughout the world. The Bible teaches in Psalm 19 that the stars in creation, their voice goes throughout the world. There's no language that they do not hear him speak. Chapter 2. Chapter 1 deals with those who have no religion whatsoever, yet they know there's a God. By creation, they'll know there's a God in their conscience, because their conscience will tell you, at least at the beginning, this is right, this is wrong. Your conscience will tell you that. Chapter 2, though, what he deals now is with religious people, those who are steeped in religion. These are individuals who go to church. These are individuals who keep the law. These are individuals who pride themselves on being a guide. Look what he says, verse 17. Indeed, you are called a Jew, and you rest on the law, and you make your boast in God. These are people who say, I know there is a God, and God has revealed himself to our people, the Jews, and you know his will, and you approve the things that are excellent. That word excellent means morally appropriate. Being instructed out of the law, out of the Ten Commandments, for instance, in Exodus 20. And are confident that you yourselves are guides to the blind and light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish. These are individuals that are quite proud because they know that God had given the law to the Jewish nation. They know that they have certain privileges. But the problem became this, with these people, this group. Romans chapter 1, no religion whatsoever. They didn't believe in God. Or they didn't attend services. Didn't hear the name of Jesus or God. They still know there's a God. Chapter 2, though, these are instructed in the law, but they became very proud. They became individuals who were confident. They were guides to the blind, a light to those who were in darkness, instructor of the foolish and teacher of babes, having the form of knowledge and the truth in the law. Yet they had a big problem. They had a huge problem. These teachers taught, but they did not do what they taught. And this is what he addresses here. We talked about it in Sunday school, this whole concept of hypocrisy. Individuals who teach the law, could be positions like myself, who teach, who preach, and yet do not do. You preach that a man should not steal. Do you steal? The implied answer is yes. You who say do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? Yes, you do. You who abhor idols, do you rob temples for idols? You who make your boast in the law, the idea that, well, we were given the law. Do you dishonor God through breaking the law? For the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles. Now, I've heard, being a preacher for all these years, I would go to church if so-and-so wasn't there, because he's a hypocrite. And let me say that Christ predicted hypocrites in the church, Matthew chapter 13. He was well aware of those. The problem is this, there's some inconsistency and even hypocrisy in that statement. Hear this. I read the paper about a physician who amputated the wrong leg. That's a big problem. Because not only did he cut off the good leg, he still got a bad leg. And that bad leg's got to go too. Now, does that mean I read that and think, oh, doctors are all hypocrites? I'm never going to go to a doctor again after that. No, we don't think that way. But how many times I've heard people say, I don't go to church because it's full of hypocrites. Should that keep them from going to church? Not at all. Would that same individual not go to a doctor because the doctor performed a surgery that wasn't required? No, most likely not. So there's some hypocrisy in the statement. Are there hypocrites within the church? Well, most certainly. The church is open to all. We can't prevent them from coming. We welcome them. Hopefully they'll get right with God. But let's pause for a moment. Let's be honest. No raising hands. How many of us have our own little standards that we ourselves don't keep? Come on now. I have things that I don't always consistently do, and it's my own standard, and I don't always keep them. We all have a little bit of hypocrisy in our own soul. So, What Paul does is he builds the case that all mankind before God has issues. And he does it elaborately, in detail. And that's what he's doing in chapter 1. The godless, those who make no claim to God, those who have no inherent idea about religion, they live in the darkest, deepest tribes, wherever, yet they know there's a God, because creation will tell you that, and their own conscience will tell you there's a God. This is right, this is wrong. Where do we get that conscience? We get that from God. That tells us, therefore, there are things that are right with God, things that are wrong with God in terms of what He approves. There are things that we approve of, things that we don't. Conscience tells us there's a God. Number 2, religious people, Paul is saying, you cannot preach religion and not keep it. God is no fool. Be sure your sin will find you out. Now the good news comes in chapter 3. He starts bringing in the whole concept of why Christ came. But he does this in great detail in the book of Romans. It's like an extended gospel, as I've said before. Paul addresses the Jews specifically because they're religious in chapter 2, verse 17. He talks about the privilege that the Jews had. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 8, a book in the Old Testament, it reads, and what great nation is there than that has such statutes and righteous judgments as are in all this law which I set before you this day. Moses is speaking, and he's referring to the nation Israel. You have tremendous statutes and righteous judgments. You're privileged, and yet God expects you to be consistent. Verses 19 and 20, these Jews were very confident that because they were Jews, they could say one thing and do another. Well, God has favored us. And Paul says, no, that can't be. They taught but did not practice. What did Jesus say about this? Take your Bibles. You want to put your finger in Romans 2. We'll come right back to it. Let's look at Christ. Matthew 15. In Matthew 15, verse 14, Christ had had an encounter with the religious elite of the day. They were called the scribes. That word means orthodox. They were very orthodox in the practice of their religion, yet they were hypocrites. They said one thing and did another. These were the ones that orchestrated the crucifixion. In Matthew chapter 15, verse 12, he speaks and they're really riled up, and then his disciples came and said to him, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying? The lowly Jesus offending somebody? Can that be? Believe you me, you read the Bible, and there's 3 responses to Jesus. Utter joy, or sad, or mad. I mean, really. Sometimes people walked away furious, so mad that they wanted to put him to death. Eventually they did. Here's one encounter in which the religious leaders were furious at him. Do you know that the Pharisees, his disciples are saying this to him, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this? But he answered and said, Christ speaking, every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted, in other words, these are not Christians, will be uprooted. A good sign of being uprooted is if you're offended at the words of Christ. Be careful. If you don't like Christ's statement in John 14:6, where he said, I am the way, the truth, the life, no man comes to the Father but by me. If that offends you, you may be uprooted. In other words, you're not of God. Verse 14, let them alone, Jesus says. They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch. These were hypocrites. Christ said, let them alone. Their judgment is coming. Unfortunately, those who follow these people will both fall into judgment. And if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch. Now, what is Christ saying here? Christ is well aware of those who have the reality and those who only have a ritual. Church once in a while. When I first, God bless my family, I wasn't raised in I was raised in a nominal Christian faith. Fortunately, the church did not move because we wouldn't know where it had gone, because we only go on Easter and Christmas. And if they would have moved in between, we're in trouble. Where's the church? You can go to church weekly, say your prayers, but if it's not real, it's just ritual. And Christ is saying, be careful. It has to be from your heart. All behavior springs from the heart. Do not be the statue in which the water flows out of the lips, and that statue never tastes the water. The life-giving Spirit is what will bring you eternal life. And it will show itself in obedience. It will show itself in love for your neighbor. It starts out small and it slowly grows. But it definitely grows. Christ says, be careful. In 2 Timothy 3:5, Paul says this, the author of this book as well, says, they have a form of godliness but deny its power. From such people turn away. Christ himself says this regarding these individuals who make great proclamations about religion yet are not consistent in the life that they live. As a matter of fact, they are so divorced from the reality. Christ says this. Hear these words, Matthew chapter 23, verse 3. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. Christ was aware. Romans chapter 9, verse 4 says, well, I'll skip that. Let me take you now. Look at Romans 2, continuing on in the same section, verse 25. For circumcision is indeed profitable, for the foreskin of each male was circumcised on the 8th day of birth. For circumcision is indeed profitable if you keep the law. Circumcision showed that a Jew was a Jew and that he had obligations toward their religion, which was Judaism, and that Judaism taught that there's one God. Your circumcision aligned you with that religious faith. But your circumcision wasn't the thing that brought you to peace with God. It was just an outward sign. So what was happening is these individuals are steeped in religion, and yet, as I say, mean as a snake. It was mentioned in Sunday school how some of the mobsters back east are deeply religious in Catholicism, and yet they can order a hit on an individual, take an individual's life, and then go to Mass and confess. And Christ is saying it doesn't work that way. Look what he says now. In Romans chapter 2, he says in verse 25, for circumcision is indeed profitable if you keep the law. Let me say, you can wear a cross around your neck, you can have a dozen crosses around your neck, but if you don't keep the law that that cross represents, it means nothing. Zero. Paul is saying what? Circumcision is indeed profitable if you keep the law. Verse 25. But if you are a breaker of the law, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. It means nothing. Therefore, if an uncircumcised man, this is now one who is not a Jew, one who doesn't have the privilege of having the law, one who's never been taught about God, an individual who does not have the privileges of being associated with those who know God, he says, if an uncircumcised man, those who are outside of Judaism, has been, by the way, Paul was a Jew. If an uncircumcised man keeps the righteous requirements of the law, verse 26, will not his uncircumcision be counted as circumcision? See, God is not concerned about your outward signs of religion. He's concerned about the inward heart that says, I believe, therefore I behave. A good example of this is in the person of Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. Here was a Roman soldier employed by the Romans, hated by the Jews as a result, yet he was a very godly man. In Acts chapter 10, it says this about Cornelius. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius. Who is this? A despised non-Jew. Take a race that you don't like. Picture that in your mind. Then put that name in here. This man is called Cornelius. He was not a Jew. A centurion of what was called the Italian regiment. I'm reading out of Acts chapter 10 now. He was a commander of 100 men. A devout, note this, a devout man, and one who feared God with all his household, who gave alms, he gave gifts, generously to the people, and prayed to God always. Now here is a man that was not Jewish, not religious, but what he was is that he was very, had a heart for God and had a heart for people. And as a result, God reveals himself to Cornelius and says, I'm going to send a man to you by the name of Peter. And Peter's going to tell you what it is to know God. This is what Paul is referring to when he says, therefore, if an uncircumcised man keeps the righteous requirements of law, will not his uncircumcision be counted as circumcision? And will not the physical uncircumcised, if he fulfills the law, judge you, who even with your written code of circumcision are a transgressor of the law? How is it that a non-Jew will actually judge a Jew, even though they had great privileges, because this Jew did not keep the commandments, but the non-Jew did, and that non-Jew, because he had a good heart and really believed and showed that through his faith and his practice, he actually can stand in judgment of the non-Jew. That's talking about the final day of judgment that is to come. For he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not from men. Now, the few minutes I have remaining, allow me to summarize. And the way I'm going to do this is I'd like for you to take your Bibles and turn to 1 Samuel 15:22 in the Old Testament. This is a key passage for this whole concept of religion and obeying. And 1 Samuel 15. Saul, a Jew, king of Israel, he had been instructed by God, but only was partially obedient. In 1 Samuel 15, he comes in contact now with Samuel the prophet. And Saul is explaining why he's been disobedient. We're reading out of 1 Samuel 15 now, verse 22. And Samuel responds, has the Lord a great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. Now remember, witchcraft is the contact with the dead, or contact with demons, to gain power over people here. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness as an iniquity and idolatry. Now, go back to verse 22. Has the Lord a great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. What Samuel is saying is that you can give $1,000, $1 million to the church, and yet if you do not obey God the rest of the week or month, that means nothing. That's what he's saying here. You can make great sacrifices. Individuals will give their collective goods to the church. I've seen this. Give it to the rescue mission, the homeless center. I've seen this at the end of their life. That really does not stand in deed if their whole life previous to that has been reckless abandonment toward God. It doesn't matter. One act of sacrifice is not going to square it with God if in your heart you're rebellious. That's what he's saying. You can go and make confession on Sunday and feel good about it, but then turn right around and violate God's law all during the week. It means nothing to God. Allow me to read these words to you out of Isaiah 1. This is stunning, and this again is about a whole group of individuals that are very religious. In Isaiah chapter 1, verse 11, note these words, what God is speaking now. He says, "To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices to me? Says the Lord. I've had enough of your burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fed cattle. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or lambs or goats." Remember now, these are all required in the law as an Orthodox Jew. "When you come to appear before me in the temple, who has required this from your hand, to trample my courts?" In other words, you're dirtying up my presence with your disobedience. "Bring no more futile sacrifices. Incense is an abomination to me." These are the powders that were burned. They would ascend up and they symbolized prayer. The new moons, these were festivals they kept once a month. The Sabbath, once a week. And the calling of assemblies 3 times a year. "I cannot endure iniquity in the sacred meeting." In other words, you guys live like the devil during the week and then you come to church on Sunday. Verse 14, "Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hates. They are a trouble to me. I am weary of bearing them." When you spread out your hands to pray, is what he's saying. "I will hide my ears from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves, make yourself clean. Put away the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Rebuke the oppressor. Defend the fatherless. Plead for the widow." It's amazing to me that people can be involved in such sin and yet go to church on Sunday and think, okay, I've got it all squared away now. I go back to my sinning during the week. And God says, hey, I don't want to hear your prayer and I don't want to hear anything about your sacrifices. That means nothing. Isaiah makes this real clear as God responds to these very religious people who were breaking God's law systematically, blood on their hands, whether it be symbolic or it could be actual. And they were sit there, "Cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice." They were oppressing the poor. Let me read this to you. In Hosea chapter 6, we have these words, "For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings." You know, individuals would come before these rich, could be Jews,